Montana Territory, 1872. The wind howled across the plains like a wounded animal, driving needles of rain against the windows of the Copper Creek Hotel. Inside, 24-year-old Wade Zimmerman leaned against the bar, watching droplets race down the smudged glass panes. His trail-worn Stetson sat beside his untouched whiskey, revealing sandy brown hair in need of a proper cut. 3 days' stubble shadowed his jawline, but even trail dust couldn't hide the striking blue eyes that had caught more than a few admiring glances since his arrival. Wade had spent 4 years moving from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season. The frontier was no place for putting down roots. That's what his father had taught him before a rustler's bullet left Wade orphaned at 17. Survival meant keeping your distance, your gun oiled and your horse ready to ride. Attachments were dangerous. They slowed you down when trouble came calling. And in the Montana Territory, trouble rode with the persistence of the seasons. The barkeep gestured toward Wade's glass. Wade shook his head, just waiting out the storm. The truth was, he wasn't just dodging raindrops. Tomorrow he'd start as foreman at the Rocking M, the largest spread in the county. For the first time since his father's death, Wade was considering the possibility of staying put. Not for any sentimental reason. The pay was good, and winters in Montana demanded shelter sturdier than a bedroll, nothing more. The hotel door burst open, bringing with it a gust of rain and a woman unlike any Wade had ever seen. She stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, her midnight black hair plastered against her face. 22 years old at most, with eyes the color of spring sage, she scanned the room with the wariness of a doe at a watering hole. Her simple blue dress, though drenched, couldn't hide the elegant posture or the determined set of her jaw. The saloon fell silent. Women traveling alone were rare enough in these parts, but one arriving in such a state, without baggage or escort, was something else entirely. "I need a room," she announced to no one in particular, her voice steady despite her shivering. The barkeep eyed her suspiciously. Cash up front for travelers, especially those arriving after dark. She reached into a hidden pocket and produced several coins, placing them deliberately on the counter. One night. Wade couldn't help noticing the fine quality of her speech, educated, with just a hint of southern warmth. She was no local girl, that much was certain. And the way her eyes kept darting to the door suggested she wasn't just seeking shelter from the rain. The barkeep slid a key across the counter. Room 8, top of the stairs, end of the hall. She took the key without a word, leaving a trail of rainwater as she climbed the creaking staircase. Wade found himself staring after her, something he hadn't done with a woman in years. There was a story there, one written in the tension of her shoulders and the caution in her steps. "Trouble," the barkeep muttered, following Wade's gaze. "Mark my words." Wade drained his whiskey. "Seems to me trouble's what she's running from." He couldn't have known how right he was, or how deeply their paths would soon intertwine. All he knew was that for the first time in years, something had caught his attention more compelling than the next trail or the next paycheck. And that, he told himself, was dangerous thinking indeed. Upstairs, Lily Everett locked her door and slumped against it, her legs finally giving way to exhaustion. The telegram that had brought her to this remote corner of Montana lay crumpled in her pocket. Father PASSED. CREDITORS taking everything. Do not return. The boarding school where she'd taught piano had paid her passage to San Francisco, but she'd only made it as far as Copper Creek when her purse was stolen at a way station. Now she was stranded, with barely enough money for one night's lodging and not a soul for 1,000 miles who knew her name, except, perhaps, for the men who might be following her. Her father's gambling debts had attracted dangerous associates, men who believed a daughter might pay what a dead man couldn't. Lily had no illusions about her situation. In the morning, she'd have to find work or charity, neither of which seemed abundant in a town whose main street was little more than a muddy path between saloons. As she peeled off her sodden dress, Lily stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. "You are not your father's daughter," she whispered to herself. "You will not run forever." But even as she said the words, she knew they were false. Running was all she had left. Dawn broke with surprising clarity after the previous night's storm. Wade was already at the livery, saddling his chestnut gelding, when he spotted her. The mysterious woman from the hotel was speaking with the stagecoach driver, her face animated with what appeared to be urgent negotiation. Even from a distance, Wade could tell it wasn't going well. The driver shook his head emphatically before climbing onto his seat and snapping the reins. Wade pretended to adjust his saddle as she walked past the livery. In daylight, he could see what the dimness of the saloon had hidden, the quality of her clothing despite its simplicity, the refined way she carried herself, the soft curve of her cheek that suggested youth and vulnerability despite her obvious determination. "Miss," he called before he could think better of it, "the stage doesn't run east until Thursday." She paused, regarding him with that same wariness he'd noted the night before. "You were at the hotel." Wade Zimmerman, he touched the brim of his hat, "heading out to the Rocking M today, new foreman." "Congratulations," she said flatly, clearly uninterested in his employment status. "They're hiring at the ranch," he continued. "Cook just left, owner's wife is desperate for help." Her expression shifted subtly. "What kind of help?" "Cooking, cleaning, looking after the owner's young daughter," Wade shrugged. "Pays decent, includes room and board. Better than waiting 3 days for the next stage with no money and nowhere to stay." Her eyes narrowed. "What makes you think I have no money?" "The kind of negotiating you were doing with that driver isn't the kind that ends with a ticket." Wade led his horse out of the stall. "I'm riding out there now, could put in a word, or you could try your luck here in town." He glanced meaningfully toward the saloon where several miners were already staggering out into the morning light. For a long moment he thought she'd refuse, then practicality won over pride. "Lily Everett," she said, offering neither her hand nor any further information about herself. "I can cook, clean, and mind children. I cannot, however, tolerate inappropriate behavior." Wade suppressed a smile. "Mrs. Mason runs a respectable house, ma'am, and the ranch hands no better than to cross her." He hesitated. "You'd need to ride with me." "It's 15 miles. Lily glanced around as if assessing her options. Finally, she nodded. "I accept your offer of escort, Mr. Zimmerman. When do we leave?" Within the hour, they were riding out of Copper Creek, Lily perched uncomfortably behind Wade on his gelding. She sat rigidly, holding onto the cantle rather than his waist, maintaining as much space between them as physics would allow. Every time the horse shifted beneath them, she tensed further. "You can hold on to me, Miss Everett," Wade said over his shoulder. "I promise not to get the wrong idea." "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." Her voice was strained with the effort of balancing. "Suit yourself. But it's a long ride, and thunder here has a way of stumbling when you least expect it." As if on cue, the horse stepped into a muddy rut, lurching forward. Lily's hands instinctively flew to Wade's waist, gripping the leather of his vest. He pretended not to notice her embarrassment as she quickly returned her hands to the cantle. The next hour passed in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of thunder's hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. The morning sun dried the mud from yesterday's storm, releasing the sweet scent of sage and prairie grass. It was the kind of day that reminded Wade why, despite everything, he'd never managed to leave Montana for good. "Why are you helping me?" Lily finally asked, her voice almost lost in the wind. Wade considered the question. Why had he approached her? It wasn't like him to involve himself in strangers' problems, especially when those strangers were clearly carrying troubles of their own. "Seems to me everyone deserves a chance," he said at last. "Whatever you're running from, and I'm not asking what that might be, it can't follow you to the Rocking M, not easily anyway." She was quiet for so long that Wade thought she might not respond, then so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you." By midday, they crested a ridge that revealed the Rocking M spread below them. A sprawling main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals nestled in a valley protected by pine-covered hills. Cattle dotted the grasslands beyond, and in the distance, a line of ranch hands drove a herd towards summer pasture. "It's beautiful," Lily said, the first hint of genuine emotion in her voice. Wade nodded. "Mason's built something special here, started with nothing but a land grant and determination." As they approached the ranch, Wade became acutely aware of Lily's proximity. The morning's stiff formality had gradually given way to necessity. The rhythmic motion of riding had brought her closer, her hands now resting lightly at his sides. He could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair, feel the gentle pressure of her against his back when the trail narrowed. It was distracting in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Mrs. Mason, a practical woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, took one look at Lily and hired her on the spot. The Masons' 8-year-old daughter, Emma, immediately attached herself to Lily's side, chattering about dolls and horses with equal enthusiasm. By evening, Lily was installed in a small but comfortable room off the kitchen, and Wade had moved his few possessions into the foreman's cabin near the bunkhouse. As he sat on his porch that night, watching lamplight glow in the main house windows, Wade told himself he'd done his good deed. He'd helped a woman in need, nothing more. Tomorrow he'd focus on his real purpose, learning the ranch, meeting the hands, proving his worth as foreman. Lily Everett's mysterious past and compelling presence were not his concern. He'd almost convinced himself of this when he spotted a figure slipping from the back door of the main house. Even in moonlight, he recognized Lily's graceful movement as she made her way toward the barn. Wade hesitated only a moment before following, keeping to the shadows. Something was wrong. In the barn, Lily was attempting to saddle one of the smaller horses, struggling with the weight of the heavy stock saddle. Her movements were rushed, clumsy with panic rather than inexperience. "Going somewhere?" Wade asked quietly from the doorway. Lily whirled, nearly dropping the saddle. In the lantern light, he could see tear tracks on her face and the letter clutched in her free hand. "I have to leave," she said, her voice breaking. "Tonight." "Why?" He stepped closer, noting how she backed against the horse. "Mrs. Mason seemed pleased enough with you. Emma already adores you." "They found me." She thrust the paper toward him. "This arrived with the supply wagon." Wade took the note, holding it toward the lantern. The message was brief and chilling. "We know where you are. Payment due in full tomorrow." "Who are they?" Wade asked, though he could guess. Debt collectors, probably, the kind that didn't bother with courtrooms or legal papers. Lily's hands trembled as she tried again to lift the saddle. "My father's business associates. He owed them money. A lot of money. When he died, they decided I should inherit his debts along with his name." "And can you pay them?" Her bitter laugh told him everything. "With what? My father gambled away every cent we had, including my mother's inheritance." "They don't want money anyway, they want—" She stopped, unable to finish. Wade felt something he hadn't experienced since his father's death, a protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. "They're not taking you anywhere. You don't understand, these men, they're dangerous. They'll hurt anyone who stands in their way." Lily finally managed to hoist the saddle onto the horse's back. "I won't bring trouble to people who have shown me kindness." Wade moved forward, gently taking the saddle from her hands and setting it aside. "Running won't solve this. They found you once. They'll find you again." "What choice do I have?" Her voice rose with desperation. "Stay, let me help you." "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" It was a fair question, one Wade couldn't fully answer even to himself. All he knew was that the thought of Lily disappearing into the night, frightened and alone, created a hollow ache in his chest that felt dangerously like caring. "Because no one should face danger alone," he said finally. "And because running from trouble only guarantees it'll catch you tired." She tried to move past him, reaching again for the saddle. "I can't stay. I won't have blood on my hands." Lily, it was the first time he'd said her name, just her name, without the formal Miss Everett. Something in his voice made her pause, one hand on the saddle, the other clenched around the threatening note. She looked up at him, really looked at him, as if seeing past the dusty clothes and trail-hardened exterior to something else, something that might be worth trusting. "Let me help you," he said again, softer this time. The barn fell silent except for the occasional stamp of horses' hooves and the distant cry of a coyote. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection formed not from attraction, though that was undeniably present, but from recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to be hunted, to be alone, to believe that isolation was the only safe harbor. "How?" she whispered. "How can anyone help me?" Before Wade could answer, the barn door creaked. They both turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her nightgown billowing around her small frame. "Miss Lily, are you leaving us?" The child's voice was small and confused. Lily's shoulders slumped in defeat. She knelt to Emma's level, smoothing the girl's tousled hair. "No, sweetheart, I was just checking on the horses." Emma's face brightened. "Papa says horses get lonely too sometimes." "Your papa is right," Lily said, rising and taking the child's hand. "Let's get you back to bed before your mother notices you're gone." As Lily led Emma back toward the house, she glanced over her shoulder at Wade. The look they exchanged held no words but a promise nonetheless. She would stay, he would help. What came after, neither could say. Wade spent a restless night strategizing. By dawn, he had a plan, not a good one perhaps, but better than watching Lily flee into the wilderness or worse, be taken by whoever was hunting her. He left his cabin early, heading straight for the main house where he knew Mrs. Mason would be starting breakfast. To his surprise, Lily was already there, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded bread dough. She looked up when he entered, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she'd slept no better than he had. "Mrs. Mason greeted him with her usual brisk efficiency. "Coffee's hot, Mr. Zimmerman, help yourself." Wade poured a cup, using the moment to observe Lily. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she moved with purpose, her hands working the dough with practiced skill. She'd chosen to stay not just because Emma had interrupted her escape, but because something had changed when he'd said her name. "Mrs. Mason," he began carefully, "I need to speak with you and Mr. Mason about a situation that's arisen." The older woman's shrewd eyes darted between Wade and Lily. "I suspected as much when I found Miss Everett trying to saddle Daisy in the middle of the night." Lily's head snapped up. "You know. Child, I raised 3 boys and buried a husband before taking on this ranch. Nothing happens here without my knowing." Mrs. Mason wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll fetch Mr. Mason." When the ranch owner joined them, Wade laid out what little he knew. Lily was being pursued by men collecting a debt that wasn't hers to pay. They'd found her once and would arrive today expecting to take her away. "How many men are we talking about?" Mason asked, his weathered face grave. "The note doesn't say," Lily answered. "In the past there were 3 of them, led by a man named Silas Gentry." Mason's expression darkened. "Gentry's reputation precedes him. He's no mere debt collector, he's a trafficker. Buys debts from desperate men, then collects payment by taking their female relatives to work in his establishments down in Colorado Territory." Lily's face drained of color. "My father wouldn't have, he couldn't have." "Men in debt make poor choices," Mason said, not unkindly. "But that doesn't mean we're letting Gentry take you." Wade felt a surge of respect for the rancher. "I have a plan, sir. But it requires your cooperation and Miss Everett's trust." As Wade outlined his strategy, Lily's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. It wasn't elaborate, simplicity was their best ally given the short time frame. By the time he finished, the first ranch hands were filing in for breakfast, their curious glances suggesting they sensed something unusual was happening. "It could work," Mason conceded, "but it's dangerous for all of us." "I can't ask you to risk your ranch, your family," Lily began. Mrs. Mason cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Child, some things are worth fighting for. A woman's freedom is one of them." She turned to Wade. "You're asking for considerable trust from a young lady you've just met, Mr. Zimmerman." Wade looked directly at Lily. "I am, but I'm also offering my word. And out here, that's the only thing of value I truly own." Something passed between them then, an understanding deeper than words. Lily straightened her shoulders, decision made. "When will they come?" "Men like Gentry arrive when least expected," Mason said. "We should be ready from now until sundown." They didn't have to wait nearly that long. Shortly after midday, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, approaching fast from the direction of town. Wade, who'd been watching from the barn loft, climbed down quickly and found Lily in the kitchen garden, gathering vegetables for the evening meal. "They're coming," he said without preamble. 3 riders. "Vast." Lily's hand stilled on the basket handle, her knuckles whitening. For a moment fear clouded her eyes, then determination replaced it. "I'm ready." Wade wanted to say more, to offer reassurance, perhaps, or to acknowledge the courage it took for her to stand her ground. Instead, he simply nodded and headed toward the bunkhouse to alert the ranch hands who'd agreed to help. By the time 3 riders pulled up in front of the main house, the ranch appeared to be going about its normal business. Men worked in the corrals or lounged near the bunkhouse. Mrs. Mason hung laundry while Emma played nearby with her doll. Only someone looking closely would notice the strategic positioning of the hands or the rifle propped against the wash basin within Mrs. Mason's reach. The lead rider dismounted, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and the cold eyes of a predator. His companions remained mounted, hands resting conspicuously near their holsters. "Afternoon," the man called, "looking for the owner of this spread." Mason emerged from the barn, walking unhurriedly toward the visitors. "That would be me." "Richard Mason, something I can help you with." Gentry's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps I'm looking for a young lady who might have found employment here, dark hair, green eyes." "Name of Lily Everett." "What business would you have with one of my employees?" Mason's tone remained pleasant, though his stance had shifted subtly. "She's carrying something that belongs to me." Gentry patted his vest pocket. "I have the papers right here, her father's debt, signed over to me before his unfortunate passing." "A debt can't be inherited without an estate to claim against," Mason pointed out. "Basic law." Gentry's smile tightened. "My arrangement with Everett was more personal in nature. His daughter understands the terms." His gaze drifted to the house. "I know she's here, let's not make this difficult." "The lady you're looking for isn't available." Wade stepped forward from where he'd been leaning against the corral fence. "But I'd be happy to discuss settlement of that debt." Gentry assessed Wade with the practiced eye of someone who sized up potential threats for a living. And you would be. Wade Zimmerman. Foreman, he moved to stand beside Mason, deliberately casual. Also, as of yesterday, Miss Everett's husband. A ripple of surprise passed through the ranch hands who weren't privy to the plan. One of Gentry's men leaned forward in his saddle. Husband, that wasn't part of our information. Gentry waved him to silence. A convenient claim, where's the bride? I'd like to offer my congratulations in person. As if on cue, the front door opened and Lily emerged. She changed into her best dress, a modest blue calico that nonetheless highlighted the grace of her movement. Her hair was neatly pinned and she wore a simple band of silver on her left hand, Mrs. Mason's contribution to their charade. Wade felt his breath catch at the sight of her. Even knowing it was a pretense, something primal stirred in him at the idea of Lily as his wife. She descended the porch steps with the composure of a queen approaching her subjects, though Wade alone was close enough to see the tremble in her hands. Mr. Gentry, she acknowledged coolly, you're a long way from Denver. The man's eyes narrowed. You've led me on quite a chase, my dear. Your father would be disappointed in your lack of family loyalty. My father lost the right to my loyalty when he tried to sell me to pay his gambling debts. Lily's voice was steady now, strength flowing into her with each word. I owe you nothing. The paper I hold says otherwise. Gentry's hand moved toward his coat. Wade shifted, positioning himself between Lily and the debt collector. That paper, whatever it says, has no legal standing. Miss Everett, Mrs. Zimmerman now is under my protection. Any claim against her is a claim against me. And against this ranch, Mason added, the other hands moving in to flank him. We take care of our own here. Gentry's eyes darted around the yard, calculating odds. His men were outnumbered 3-1, and even in the best circumstances, their chances of taking Lily by force were slim. A marriage doesn't erase a debt, he tried, though the confidence had leached from his voice. If anything, it transfers the obligation to the husband. Then send me a bill, Wade replied evenly. I'll be happy to discuss it with the territorial judge. I understand he's particularly interested in men who trade in human lives. For a tense moment, the only sound was the creak of saddle leather as Gentry's men shifted uncomfortably. Then the debt collector laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Well played, he conceded, but debts have a way of coming due one way or another. Remember that, Mrs. Zimmerman. He turned his horse with a sharp jerk of the reins. His men followed suit, clearly relieved to be departing without bloodshed. As they rode away, Wade remained tense, watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Will they be back? Lily asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. Not today, Wade answered. Possibly not ever if they believe we're serious about involving the law. And are we serious about that? Wade glanced down at her. I am if you are. Gentry's type prey on isolation and fear. They count on victims remaining silent. Around them, the ranch began to return to normal operations. Mason slapped Wade on the shoulder as he passed. Quick thinking with that marriage story, almost believed it myself. When they were alone, Lily twisted the borrowed ring on her finger. Thank you for helping me stand my ground. No one's ever done that for me before. Wade shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, her gaze was direct, challenging. They wouldn't have. Most would have sent me away rather than risk confrontation. You gave me a choice when everyone else, including my own father, tried to take my choices away. The sincerity in her voice made something twist in Wade's chest. He'd acted on instinct, protecting Lily because it felt impossible to do otherwise. Now, facing her gratitude, he realized just how significant that instinct had been. For years, he'd avoided connections, believing they were liabilities in a harsh world. Yet here he stood, having risked himself for a woman he barely knew, feeling more alive than he had in years. I should return, Mrs. Mason's ring, Lily said, breaking the silence between them. The charade served its purpose. Wade caught her hand as she twisted the silver band. Wait, he hesitated, uncertain of his next words. What if it wasn't a charade? Lily's eyes widened. What do you mean? Gentry might return. If he thinks you're truly married, protected by law and custom, he's less likely to pursue his claim. Wade cleared his throat, aware he was making a hash of this. It would be a marriage of convenience, of course. For your protection. Of convenience, Lily repeated slowly. You would do that, bind yourself legally to a stranger just to protect me from Gentry. Put that way, it sounded either noble or foolish. Wade wasn't sure which. Not just a stranger, you. The distinction seemed important, though Wade couldn't have explained why. Lily studied his face, searching for something, duplicity perhaps, or pity, and if I wanted to leave someday. To make my own way once Gentry is no longer a threat. Then you'd be free to go. The words cost him more than he expected. I'm offering protection, not imprisonment. Lily's gaze dropped to their still-joined hands. I need time to think about this. Wade released her hand, taking a step back. Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly. As Lily walked back to the house, Wade wondered what madness had possessed him to make such an offer. Marriage was the last thing he'd ever expected to propose, especially to a woman he'd known for barely a day. Yet something about Lily Everett had burrowed under his skin, her courage, her determination, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. For the first time in years, Wade Zimmerman was thinking beyond the next season or the next paycheck. He was thinking about possibilities, dangerous, exhilarating possibilities that challenged everything he'd believed about surviving alone on the frontier. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Wade threw himself into his duties as foreman, learning the ranch's operations and earning the respect of the hands through hard work and fair treatment. Lily excelled in her role in the Mason household, cooking meals that had the bunkhouse talking for days and quickly becoming indispensable to Mrs. Mason. They saw each other daily but rarely spoke of Gentry or Wade's impulsive proposal. The borrowed ring had been returned, the pretense of marriage allowed to fade now that the immediate threat had passed. Yet something remained between them, a current of awareness that made even casual encounters feel charged with possibility. A week after Gentry's visit, Wade returned from the North Range to find a letter waiting for him. The spidery handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the Denver postmark sent a chill through him. He waited until he was alone in his cabin before breaking the seal. The message inside was brief. Marriage doesn't change ownership of debt, payment expected in full, more pleasant for all if the lady comes willingly. Wade crumpled the paper in his fist. Gentry hadn't given up, he'd merely changed tactics. The implied threat was clear. Next time he wouldn't come alone or announce his presence with a polite conversation. Wade debated whether to show Lily the letter. She'd begun to relax, to smile more freely, especially with Emma. Bringing back the shadow of fear seemed cruel, yet keeping her in ignorance of the danger could be more cruel still. His decision was made for him when a knock sounded at his door. Lily stood on his porch, a covered plate in her hands. Mrs. Mason sent supper, she explained. She said you missed the evening meal. Wade stepped back, inviting her in. The foreman's cabin was small, just a main room with a wood stove, table, and chair, plus a curtained-off sleeping area. He'd kept it meticulously neat, a habit from trail days when everything had to be packed at a moment's notice. Lily set the plate on the table, then noticed the crumpled letter in his hand. Bad news. Wade hesitated only a moment before handing her the paper. Gentry. She smoothed the wrinkled sheet, her expression hardening as she read. He's persistent, I'll give him that. Her voice was steady, but Wade noticed how her fingers trembled against the paper. We should tell Mason, Wade said. Increase security around the ranch. Lily shook her head. And turn this place into an armed camp. How long could that last? The Masons have been kind enough already. What's your alternative? Running again? Wade couldn't keep the frustration from his voice. We've discussed that. He'll find you. I know. She placed the letter carefully on the table. That's why I've been thinking about your offer. Wade stilled. My offer. Of marriage, a legal barrier between Gentry and whatever claim he thinks he has on me. Lily met his gaze directly. If it's still open for consideration. It is, Wade said, perhaps too quickly. He moderated his tone. But I don't want you accepting out of fear or desperation. That's not much better than what Gentry offers. A hint of a smile touched Lily's lips. I'm not accepting anything yet. I'm considering. There's a difference. And what factors are you considering? Wade found himself moving closer, drawn by the new confidence in her bearing. Practical ones mostly. I have no family, no home, limited prospects. You offer protection, security. Her gaze never wavered from his. But I would need certain assurances. Name them. That this would be a true marriage, not just on paper. That I would have a say in decisions affecting our lives, that you wouldn't, she faltered for the first time, that you wouldn't expect me to be something I'm not. Wade understood what she wasn't saying. A marriage of convenience often meant very different things to men and women. I would never force anything on you, Lily. Not my protection, not my name, and certainly not myself. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and if feelings should develop for either of us. It was a forward question, one that would have been shocking in the drawing rooms of her previous life. But they were far from drawing rooms now, and honesty seemed the only currency worth trading in. Then we'd face that together, Wade answered, like anything else. Lily nodded, seeming satisfied. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. After I've had one more night to be certain. After she left, Wade sat at his table for a long time, the food growing cold before him. He'd offered marriage as protection, a practical solution to Lily's predicament. Yet with each passing day, practicality seemed less and less the driving force behind his actions. The realization was unsettling. Wade had spent years believing that the frontier was no place for tender feelings, that survival demanded emotional isolation. Now he found himself contemplating a lifetime tied to a woman whose past was largely unknown to him, whose future would be irrevocably linked with his own. And rather than fear, he felt something dangerously close to hope. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed to mock Wade's tangled thoughts. He rose early, completing his morning chores with mechanical efficiency while keeping one eye on the main house. Would Lily appear with her answer? Or would he discover she'd slipped away in the night, choosing flight over the uncertainty of binding herself to him? His question was answered when Mason approached him at the corral. Miss Everett asked to speak with you, the rancher said. She's waiting in the garden. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs as he made his way to the small kitchen garden behind the main house. Lily stood among the rows of vegetables, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light. She wore a simple dress of faded blue, a basket hooked over one arm as she gathered herbs. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. Good morning, Mr. Zimmerman. Miss Everett, he removed his hat, turning the brim in his hands. You wanted to see me. I did, I've made my decision. She set down her basket and faced him fully. Before I give you my answer, I need to tell you something. About my father, about why Gentry is so determined to collect his debt. Wade waited, sensing this was important to her. My father wasn't just a gambler. He was a thief, a con man, a man who left a trail of victims from Virginia to Colorado. Lily's voice was steady, though her hands were clasped tightly before her. His last scheme involved Gentry, a false investment opportunity that cost Gentry a considerable sum. When Gentry discovered the fraud, my father offered him something in exchange for his life. You, Wade said quietly. Lily nodded. Me, my services, specifically in one of Gentry's establishments in Denver. When I learned of the arrangement, I fled. My father died of heart failure a month later, but Gentry's claim didn't die with him. Her chin lifted slightly. I wanted you to know exactly what kind of family you'd be attaching yourself to if you married me. Wade considered her words carefully. My father was shot in the back by a man he'd once called friend, all for a handful of cattle. I buried him alone and spent the next 7 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to form connections that could hurt me. He took a step closer. We're all carrying something, Lily. The question is whether we carry it alone or together. Something flickered in her eyes, relief perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Then my answer is yes, I will marry you, Wade Zimmerman. For protection, for security, and for the chance to stop running. Wade felt a weight lift from his shoulders, when he hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. When? As soon as possible, Lily said practically. If Gentry's letter is any indication, he won't wait long to act. They were married 3 days later in the Masons' front parlor, with the ranch hands as witnesses and the circuit preacher officiating. Lily wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Mason, hastily altered to fit her slighter frame. Wade had splurged on a new shirt and had actually paid the barber in town for a proper shave. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words exchanged with steady voices that betrayed none of the complexity behind their union. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Wade hesitated only a moment before brushing his lips against Lily's in the lightest of kisses, a promise of respect rather than passion. The ranch celebrated with a feast and dancing in the barn, the hands taking turns partnering Lily while Wade looked on, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. She moved with natural grace, laughing as she was spun from partner to partner, her eyes finding his between dances as if to reassure herself of his presence. Later, when the celebration had wound down and they walked together to the foreman's cabin, now their shared home, Wade felt the first stirrings of uncertainty. They paused at the door, the moment heavy with unspoken questions. I meant what I said, Wade told her quietly, about not expecting anything. Lily looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. I know. And I appreciate it, she took a deep breath. But we are married, truly married as I requested. Whatever comes next, we face together. Inside the cabin, Wade had made what preparations he could: fresh bedding, a bouquet of wildflowers in a jar on the table, an attempt at creating something more home-like than his usual Spartan quarters. Lily moved through the small space, touching things lightly as if acquainting herself with her new domain. It's not much, Wade apologized. It's more than I had yesterday, Lily replied simply. And it's ours. The word ours hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Wade busied himself building up the fire against the evening chill, giving Lily privacy behind the curtain that separated the sleeping area. When she emerged, she'd changed into a white nightgown, her hair falling in a dark cascade around her shoulders. I can sleep out here, Wade offered, gesturing to his chair. Until you're more comfortable. Lily considered him for a long moment. That isn't necessary, the bed is large enough for both of us. That night they lay side by side, a careful distance maintained between them. Wade stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of Lily's presence beside him, the sound of her breathing, the faint scent of lavender, the occasional rustle as she shifted position. He'd shared close quarters with others on cattle drives and in bunkhouses, but this was different. This was intimacy of a kind he'd avoided for years. Wade, Lily's voice was soft in the darkness. Yes. Thank you. For everything. He turned his head to find her watching him, her eyes reflecting the dying firelight. You don't need to thank me. We made a bargain fair and square. Is that all this is to you? A bargain? The question caught him off guard. No, he admitted finally, not anymore. She moved closer then, her hand finding his beneath the blankets. Not to me either. They fell asleep that way, hands clasped in the space between them, a small connection but significant in what it promised for the future. The next weeks brought adjustments as they learned to navigate married life. Lily transformed the cabin with small touches: curtains at the windows, wildflowers in jars, a quilt pieced from scraps Mrs. Mason had given her. Wade found himself looking forward to returning home each evening, to the light in the window and Lily's voice welcoming him. They developed routines: breakfast together before dawn, Wade riding out to oversee the ranch work, Lily dividing her time between their home and continuing to help Mrs. Mason. Evenings were spent in quiet conversation, learning each other's histories, dreams, and preferences. Physical intimacy developed gradually, beginning with casual touches and progressing to more lingering caresses as trust deepened between them. By the time autumn painted the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, Wade could scarcely remember a time when Lily hadn't been part of his life. The threat of gentry had receded to a distant shadow, mentioned less frequently as days passed without incident. They began to plan for winter, for a future that stretched beyond immediate survival. Then came the letter from the territorial marshal, requesting Wade's presence in Helena to testify against a gang of rustlers he'd helped capture the previous year. The trial would last at least a week, possibly longer. I can refuse, Wade said as they discussed the summons over supper. Mason would back me if I explained. Lily shook her head. You have to go. Those men nearly killed you and 3 other hands. They need to face justice. I don't like leaving you alone. I won't be alone. I have the Masons, the ranch hands. Gentry hasn't been seen in months. Lily reached across the table to take his hand. We can't live in fear forever, Wade. That's no kind of life. Reluctantly, Wade agreed. He spent the days before his departure ensuring that everything at the ranch was in order, that the hands knew to keep a watchful eye on his cabin and its occupant. On the morning he left, he held Lily longer than usual, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. 1 week, he promised, 2 at the most, then I'll be home. I'll be waiting, she answered, standing on the porch as he rode away, waving until he disappeared from sight. The trial proceeded more quickly than expected. By the 5th day Wade had given his testimony, the rustlers had been sentenced, and he was free to return to the rocking M. He pushed his horse harder than usual, eager to be home, to see Lily's face light up when he appeared. He arrived at the ranch near sunset, the buildings bathed in golden light that made everything seem more vivid, more precious. Something in his chest loosened at the sight of smoke rising from his cabin's chimney. Lily was home waiting for him. As Wade approached, however, he noticed something odd. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, though the evening was cool enough to warrant a closed door. No lamplight shone from within despite the gathering dusk. An uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. "Lily," he called, dismounting and approaching cautiously. No answer came. Wade drew his revolver, pushing the door open with his boot. The cabin interior was dim, but he could make out signs of a struggle: an overturned chair, scattered cooking implements. His heart pounding, Wade lit the lamp on the table. The cabin was empty, but a piece of paper had been stabbed to the table with Lily's kitchen knife. Wade recognized the handwriting immediately. "She's mine by right, payment collected in full. Follow if you value her life." Cold fury replaced fear. Gentry had waited for Wade to leave, then taken what he considered his property, but he'd underestimated two critical factors: Wade's determination and Lily's resourcefulness. Wade was gathering his weapons when a pounding at the door startled him. Mason burst in, his face grave. "Zimmerman, thank God you're back, Miss Lily." "Gentry took her," Wade said grimly, checking his ammunition. "How long ago?" "This morning, 3 men headed south toward the territorial border. We only found out when she didn't come to help with dinner." Mason handed Wade a piece of fabric. "She left this caught in the back door." "Emma found it." Wade took the scrap, torn from the hem of Lily's blue dress. Clever girl, she'd left him a trail, knowing he would follow despite Gentry's warning. "I need your fastest horse," Wade said, "and any men you can spare." "Already saddling them," Mason confirmed. 5 hands are ready to ride with you." "No," Wade shook his head. "This is between me and Gentry. The fewer men tracking them, the better chance I have of getting close without them detecting me." Mason studied him for a moment, then nodded. "At least take Johnson. He's the best tracker we have, and he can ride ahead if you need to send for help." Wade agreed to this compromise. Within 30 minutes, he and Johnson were following the trail south, guided by the waning moon and Johnson's uncanny ability to read the land. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and check for signs of passage. Near dawn, they discovered a campsite, hastily abandoned, embers still warm. Gentry was pushing hard, driving toward the territorial border where he likely had allies waiting. But his haste was causing him to make mistakes, leaving clearer tracks than a more careful man would have. "They're less than 2 hours ahead," Johnson assessed, studying the ground. 3 horses, 4 riders. "One of the horses is carrying double." "Lily," Wade said, his jaw tight, "can we catch them before nightfall?" Johnson nodded. "If we push and if they don't spot us coming." They remounted, following the trail as it wound through increasingly rugged country. The pursuit narrowed Wade's focus to a single point: finding Lily. Everything else, fatigue, hunger, even caution, became secondary. By late afternoon, they spotted dust on the horizon, 3 riders moving fast across open country toward a line of trees that marked a creek bed. "That's them," Johnson confirmed. "Creek's their last water before the border. They'll have to stop there." Wade studied the terrain. "There's a ridge that runs parallel to the creek. If we circle around, we can get ahead of them, be waiting when they stop to water the horses." The plan was risky. It meant abandoning the direct pursuit and gambling that Gentry would follow the expected route. But it offered the best chance of surprise, of catching Gentry when Lily was near water and shelter rather than in the middle of open ground where a desperate man might use her as a shield. They circled wide, approaching the creek from the west while keeping the ridge between themselves and Gentry's party. The sun was low when they reached a position overlooking the spot where the trail met the water. From their vantage point, they could see the approaching dust cloud without being seen. "How do you want to play this?" Johnson asked, checking his rifle. "I need to get close enough to make sure Lily is unharmed," Wade said. "You stay here with the rifle. If things go wrong, take out the other 2 men first, then Gentry. And if they're using the lady as a shield." Wade's expression hardened. "Then you make sure I have a clear shot at Gentry." They didn't have to wait long. The 3 riders approached the creek at a trot, the horses showing signs of exhaustion from the hard push south. Wade's heart leapt when he spotted Lily riding double behind one of Gentry's men. Her hands appeared to be bound, but she sat upright, her posture suggesting defiance rather than defeat. The men dismounted, leading their horses to water. Gentry grabbed Lily roughly from the saddle, cutting her bonds only to secure her to a small tree near the creek bank. She didn't struggle, conserving her energy, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Wade waited until the men were focused on watering the horses before beginning his stealthy approach. He used the creek bank for cover, moving silently through years of practice stalking game. When he was within 20 yards, he could hear their conversation. "Waste of time," one of the men was saying. Marshall's probably already been notified. By who? Gentry scoffed. The husband's away, and by the time he returns, we'll be across the border. No territorial marshal has jurisdiction in Colorado, and I have friends there who ensure my privacy. Still say we should have just killed her once we crossed the line, the third man muttered. Less trouble than transporting an unwilling woman all the way to Denver. And waste a perfectly valuable asset, Gentry approached Lily, gripping her chin roughly. No, gentlemen, this one's special, education, breeding, looks. Once she's properly broken in, she'll earn back her father's debt tenfold. Lily jerked her face away from his grasp. My husband will find you, she said, her voice steady despite the fear Wade could see in her eyes. And when he does, you'll wish you'd never heard the name Everett. Gentry laughed. Your husband is a saddle tramp who got lucky. He won't risk his neck coming after you, not against 3 armed men. Besides, by the time he returns to that ranch, our trail will be cold. You don't know Wade, Lily said, and something in her tone, the absolute conviction, the unwavering faith, sent a surge of emotion through Wade's chest. Well, he's not here, is he? Gentry turned away dismissively. Finish watering the horses. We've got another 2 hours of riding before we make camp. Wade had heard enough. He checked the position of each man, confirmed that Johnson had a clear line of sight from the ridge, then stepped into the open, his revolver trained on Gentry. Actually, I am here, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the creek bank. The reaction was instant. Gentry's men reached for their weapons but froze at Johnson's warning shot from the ridge. Gentry himself turned slowly, his hand hovering near his holster. Zimmerman, his voice betrayed no surprise, only calculation. You're either braver or stupider than I gave you credit for. Untie my wife, Wade said evenly. Then all of you drop your weapons. Lily's face had transformed at the sight of him, relief, joy, and fear for his safety all visible in her expression. Wade, she breathed, and the single word contained volumes. Gentry made no move toward Lily. You're outnumbered, Cowboy. 1 man on the ridge with a rifle doesn't change that. We all draw. Chances are at least one of us puts a bullet in you before your friend can react. Maybe, Wade acknowledged. But you'll be the first to die, I promise you that. The standoff stretched, tension building with each passing second. Wade knew he was gambling with his life, with Lily's future, but some gambles were worth taking. There's another option, Gentry offered smoothly. Business is business after all. Name your price for the woman. Every man has one. She's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Zimmerman. It's just a question of finding the right number. Gentry took a step to the side as if casually adjusting his position. What's she worth to you? $100, $500. Wade recognized the tactic. Gentry was trying to maneuver for a better angle, to distract him with negotiation while creating an opportunity to draw. He kept his revolver steady, tracking Gentry's movement. Last chance, Wade warned. Untie her and drop your weapons. Gentry's smile turned cold. You know, I think I'll just take what's mine. His hand moved for his gun with practiced speed. Wade fired first, his bullet catching Gentry in the shoulder and spinning him back. Before Gentry's men could react, Johnson's rifle cracked from the ridge, dropping one with a shot to the leg. The remaining man threw up his hands in surrender. Wade kept his revolver trained on Gentry as he approached Lily. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes never leaving the wounded debt collector. No, she shook her head, just tired and angry. Wade cut her bonds with his hunting knife, positioning himself between her and the men. Johnson, he called, cover them while I get her away from here. With pleasure came the reply from the ridge. Lily rubbed her wrists, glaring at Gentry. What happens now? Now we take them to the territorial marshal, Wade said. Kidnapping carries a hefty sentence in Montana. Gentry, clutching his bleeding shoulder, managed a pained laugh. On what evidence? It's 3 against 2, and the lady is clearly confused about who she belongs to. Wade felt Lily stiffen beside him. He expected fear, perhaps, or anger. What he didn't expect was for her to step forward, eyes blazing with a fury that transformed her delicate features into something magnificent and terrible. I belong to no one but myself, mister. Gentry, she said, her voice carrying across the creek bank. I chose to marry Wade Zimmerman. I chose to build a life with him, and I will choose to testify against you for kidnapping, assault, and attempted trafficking. She turned to Wade, her expression softening. And I choose to go home now with my husband. The ride back to the Rocking M took 2 days, with Johnson escorting the prisoners while Wade and Lily followed at a more measured pace. They camped the first night beneath a stand of pines, a small fire between them and the vast expanse of stars overhead. Lily sat close to Wade, her head resting against his shoulder. "I knew you would come," she said quietly. "When Gentry took me, I never doubted for a moment." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I would have followed you to Denver and beyond." "I know," she looked up at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. "That's why I left the fabric in the door. I needed to buy time to leave you a trail. I knew that if anyone could find me, it would be you." The simple faith in her voice humbled him. "I was so afraid," he admitted, "when I saw the cabin empty, the note. I've never been so afraid in my life. Not of Gentry. No, of losing you." The words came easier now, the emotions he'd kept guarded for so long finally finding voice. "Somewhere along the way, you became more than a responsibility or a partnership. You became everything." Lily turned in his arms, her face tilted toward his. "I love you, Wade Zimmerman, not because you rescued me or because you offered me your name and protection when I needed it most. I love you because you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw what they wanted from me." Wade cradled her face in his hands, overcome by the certainty that this moment, this woman, was what his life had been moving toward all along. "I love you, Lily Zimmerman, and I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing me." Their kiss beneath the Montana stars sealed a promise far deeper than their hasty wedding vows, a promise born not from necessity or convenience, but from the kind of love that transforms and heals. 1 year later, Wade stood on the porch of their new home, a small but sturdy house built on land Mason had sold them as a wedding gift. Inside, Lily was putting their infant daughter to bed, her voice soft as she sang a lullaby Wade remembered from his own childhood. The rocking M spread out below them, cattle dotting the valley that had become their home. Wade had continued as foreman, his position now including part ownership in the ranch's expanding operations. Lily had started a small school for the ranch hands' children and those from neighboring spreads, her natural gifts as a teacher creating opportunities she'd never imagined possible during her desperate flight from Gentry. Gentry himself was serving 10 years in the territorial prison, his network of trafficking operations exposed during the trial that had made headlines as far east as Chicago. The debt he'd claimed against Lily had been declared void, the supposed contract with her father revealed as the fraud it was. The door opened behind him and Lily stepped onto the porch, slipping her arm around his waist. "She's finally asleep," she said, leaning into him. "She fights it like she's afraid she'll miss something exciting." "Like her mother," Wade observed, pressing a kiss to Lily's temple. Lily laughed softly, perhaps, though she has her father's stubbornness. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Wade marveled at how completely his life had changed in just over a year. The man who had believed the frontier was no place for love, who had survived by avoiding connections, now found himself surrounded by the very attachments he'd once feared: a wife, a child, a community, a home. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "About the day you tried to escape through the back door of the main house," Wade replied, smiling at the memory. "How you froze when I said your name." Lily's eyes softened with remembrance. "I was so determined to run, to protect everyone from my problems, and then you called to me and something changed." "Everything changed," Wade corrected gently, "for both of us." As darkness settled over the Montana wilderness, Wade Zimmerman held his wife close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a desperate woman to a rain-soaked hotel and changed the course of 2 lives. The frontier was still harsh, still dangerous in its way. But he no longer faced it alone, no longer believed that isolation was the price of survival. Instead, he had discovered what his father never lived long enough to teach him: that love, far from being a liability in the wilderness, was the very thing that made the frontier worth taming. And that sometimes, the bravest act a person could perform was not to face danger alone, but to trust another soul enough to stand beside them against whatever came. That night, as always, they slept with their hands clasped between them, no longer strangers bound by convenience, but partners joined by choice, by love, and by the shared conviction that some journeys were meant to be traveled together.